This is the second slide presentation of the gazebo I built. The first one covered site preparation and framing of the gazebo. This one covers the gazebo decking. The distance from one edge of the base plate on my circular saw to the blade was 5 1/8 inches. So I measured that distance to my straight edge. Then I lined up 9 boards and cut them using the straight edge as a guide for the saw. I held down the straight edge with 3 or 4 1-inch coarse thread drywall screws. Then I made the cut. After the cut, treating the ends with wood preservative, and finally screwing the decking down. Occasionally, a board would be warped. I used a deck board straightening tool to fix it. Once it was straight, I screwed it down. The tool is invaluable. It can be adjusted so that you don't have to hold the handle to keep the pressure on the board. That frees up both hands to use the drill. Google bow wrench, BOWRENCH, if you're interested in purchasing one. $60 at Amazon. Using a quick square as a spacer, I angled the screw towards the square. That snugged up the board tight to the square, giving me a perfect gap. However, it's recommended to install your decking without a gap if your boards are wet. Mine weren't. So I'm getting ready to cut the boards on the other side of the section, but I needed to support the ends to prevent them falling as they were hanging off the edge of the deck. And I didn't want the cut ends splintering while making the cut. I used a 1x6 to hold up the ends of the boards. Here's the cut line for the other side of the section, and making the second cut. I used what boards remained after the cut to complete the section using the same procedure. The only difference was that I had to remove the first board so I'd have a space for the circular saw to start the cut. The remaining boards cut. I used a trigger clamp to prevent the boards from shifting while I was cutting with the circular saw. And the third section complete. For the last section, section 8, I couldn't use the process I'd used for the previous 7 sections. So I first laid down some scrap 5/4 by 6-inch boards on top of the deck joists to act as spacers between the deck joists and the decking I wanted to install. I temporarily screwed them in place. Then I laid out the decking over the spacers with the ends of the boards overlapping the decking on section 7 and section 1. I then spaced them out using my quick square to set the space between each board. Then I temporarily screwed them down as I moved towards the center of the deck. I laid down strips of 1/8 inch thick medium density fiberboard. I needed to do that because when I made the cuts to the boards, I didn't want my saw to leave a groove from the blade in the decking on section 1 and 7. I laid out my straight edge and made the cut. As before, with the leftover boards from the first cut, I laid out the rest of the boards, set up my straight edge, and cut them as well. And the deck board still laying on the 5/4 thick spacers. I removed the deck boards, the 1/8 inch MDF, and treated the cut boards with wood preservative. I removed the 5/4 inch spacers and started screwing the deck boards in place. Last section of the decking complete. Notice how the gaps for section 8 don't align with the other sections. That's because I started with one section, then worked my way counterclockwise one section at a time. As I was working my way around, I paid attention to aligning the gaps with the adjoining section. What I didn't realize was slight variations in distances were being introduced with each completed section. Those slight variations accumulated as I worked from one section to the next and showed up as the error you see when I got to that last section. What I should have done is drawn 6-inch tick marks on each of the double joists where the ends of each deck board rested on. Then I could have used those tick marks as guides to ensure the boards on each section were being laid out equally. Oh well, I never said I was a pro. I'll get it right with the next gazebo I build. As hard as I tried, I didn't get the tight fit that I was trying for on the last section as I'd gotten in the previous ones. This is what the other sections look like. Now it was time to deal with the center. Obviously, the last boards for section 8 and section 1 don't line up with the others. I had to remake those two boards, so I traced the two sides of the last board in section 8 that were okay, but extended the third side to match the edge of the board next to it. I did the same thing for the board in section 1. I brought the tracings into the workshop and connected the point to get the shape I wanted the board to look like. By the way, W stands for west. I used the points of the compass to identify the two boards so I'd know where to place them after they were fixed. Then I measured the widths of the boards for both pieces. The widths turned out to be greater than the width of one standard 5.5-inch deck board, so I ripped two boards and joined them together to give me a wider board. Then I transferred the tracings onto the boards using carbon paper. Then I cut out the pieces I needed, but each section was still two separate pieces, so I used a Kreg jig to make pocket holes and joined them together. I rounded the edges on a router table to emulate the edges in a standard 5/4 by 6-inch deck board. You'll notice the router bit left a slight ridge. I took care of that with an orbital sander. This is what the two new boards look like in place. Notice how the corners now line up. And the deck is complete except for the center hole. So I traced the center hole. I had to tape two pieces of paper together as the hole was bigger than one sheet. I only needed to trace each of the 8 points. In the shop, I extended the lines, giving me the octagon shape. I reduced the size by about 1/8 of an inch around the edges to allow for a gap, and drew lines from each point to find the center. Using carbon paper, I transferred the sections onto a board. Fortunately, all the pieces fit onto a standard 5.5-inch deck board. I cut the pieces out on a bandsaw, and here's the finished product. I held the pieces together with pocket holes drilled using the Kreg pocket hole jig. And here's the finished center. The center looks darker than the surrounding boards as I had applied wood preservative to the pieces. As the preservative dried, the center started to get lighter. And the deck for the gazebo is complete.